alone that cut themselves till the knife hits a bone. I feel just like you. If you feel like me, then let me hear you scream out, psych ward family. A 3G system in 1G ride, bitch, hitting so hard, feel like worlds collide. Man, 10,000 Cadillacs said it, let me hear it. Bitch, we claiming Cleveland and we ain't prepared to share it. So pop in some wolf pack and put your dukes up, or do it like 3-6 and tear this club up. Bloodstains, cocaine, weed, greed, and power. Mushrooms got me here, be gone in an hour. I'm ready to trip and flip the script. Haters, stomach and pistol whip. Watch it, bitches run. Where you going, son? That door is locked and the gun is cocked. Hammer back and I'm ready to attack. And I watch you drop to the sounds of a pop, pop, pop. That's what you get when you're fucking with me. You ain't nothing but a bitch ass wanna be. You wanna run your mouth, man, shut the fuck up. Don't sing it, just bring it and I'll rough you up. Cause I don't need no hook. This beat's that tight, I'll just shut up and let the bass hit you like.
Warning. Money's Crazy Mind contains language that may not be suitable for all listeners. Discretion is advised, but will be completely ignored.
I'm sick of it, doing right, doing wrong. Parents pissed off every time I write a song. Smoke, crack, worship Satan, what the fuck is that? It's something funny, made for you to laugh at.
You're destroying America with your rap.
You're so full of shit, I need to call hazmat. The only way I would ever apologize
I gotta go
if
on
I
record
had
with
my
this,
face
right?
buried
I
in your
really
sister's
do.
thighs.
Never in 39 years have I ever seen anything like
Okay, I'm sorry
It
for what
shows
it's worth,
the
but the best
fanaticism
part of you was the
of this fan
afterbirth.
base.
If you can't take a fucking joke, then go jump in the river. Na 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 na. And I fucked your sister. If you can't take a fucking joke, then go jump in the river. La 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 la. And I fucked your sister.
If you want to continue to put this narrative out there that Cody finishing the story
What
is
the fuck, dude?
this big daunting task, and Cody has all these mountains to climb and all these brass rings to pull.
And of course, we gotta thank our official music sponsor, Psych Ward, for the continued use of Funny.
My balls on her chin, she's bobbing her head to this fucking beat. Damn, dog, man, your sister's a freak. Hey, baby, you like the Eagles? Wanna hear something?
Oh, here we go. One more time. Talking about Mr. Rich and Stupid Robert Durst. One more time. This is it. This is the last time we're going to be talking about my good buddy, Robert Durst. The Jinx is done. All the episodes have aired. And we're going to talk about the final 2 episodes here this week, and to say that there is a lot to get to when it comes to these 2 episodes is probably going to be considered the understatement of the decade. When we last talked about my buddy Bob, Bob had just admitted that he wrote the now infamous Cadaver Note, and he was going to testify in the trial about why he wrote the Cadaver Note, why he was at Susan Berman's house, and why he was in LA when nobody else knew he was in Los Angeles at that time. This second half of this story with Bob Durst, I thought I knew. I've been following the trial transcripts. I know everything that happened afterwards. And we're going to get into that, but I don't want to go out of order of what was happening on the show. Now, I will admit this. I did not listen to the podcasts for episodes 5 and 6 yet, but I will. And when I do, I'll put out a audio exclusive up on Spotify and let you guys know when that is coming. So let's break everything down here. Let's start the show. Gotta thank all my supporters and sponsors out there. So, Nameless Faceless Productions, the official production company of Money's Crazy Mind. We built this place, Spook Central, and we are going gangbusters on making even more and more improvements to make this the best that the show has ever looked, ever sounded, all of that. You're going to see more of those improvements this week here on the show in just a little bit. But on top of Nameless Faceless Productions, we also got to talk about Kathie Productions. Kathie Productions is our official streaming sponsor and partner with Money's Crazy Mind. Jess and Lisa are killing it over there at the new studio. We've done even more improvements for an upcoming production, and we'll talk about that here in just a few moments when we talk about what is coming soon from Kathie Productions. Of course, we got to thank our musical sponsor, Psych Ward, of course, always for the continued use of Funny Bone as the official theme song to this particular program that you are watching, Money's Crazy Mind, and the song that you heard in our bump. But also Growing Wings Adult Services. Lisa and the team down at Growing Wings are always doing amazing things, helping adults with disabilities in this area live the best life they could. If you want to join a winning team like Growing Wings, you can reach out to Lisa. She is always looking to expand the family down there at Growing Wings. Now, one last thing. I want to thank Anthony Gonzalez and Dwayne Gupton, and of course, everybody that used to be in Big Ugly for letting me use some of their music for these past couple of episodes. And also, a very huge congratulations to Anthony Gonzalez and Four Loko. Anthony was named by Scene Magazine as the best male vocalist in a cover band And Four Locos, for the second year in a row, was named Best Cover Band in Cleveland. Congratulations to those guys. But on top of that, a little fact that maybe people may not know, unless you know Tony and you've been to a Four Loko show and everything like that. Tony's wife, Dina, has got a heck of a little voice on her as well, because she does sing sometimes every once in a while with Four Locos. But she's also a DJ. She's been a professional DJ for quite some time. And Dina was also named the best DJ in Cleveland for her company, DJ Dina the Mixing Vixen. So congratulations to all those guys, and check out Four Loko when you can. Tonight, right here now, tonight, as soon as this show goes off the air, they are going to be at Ryder Inn performing. And then I will talk more about their upcoming shows after the break, before we get into our number 2. Before we dive into episode 5, let's talk a little bit about what we got coming up here at Kathie Productions. I'm sorry. I just fixed that, just a few moments ago when I said Kathie Productions, and then I go right back to Kathie, even though it is Kathie Productions. So sorry, Lisa. But here's what's coming up from Kathie Productions. We got World Beats number 4, King V, Zombie Boy, Chazzy B and Twitch 216, Uncle Sam, Ironic, J Sauce, and 2 CLG Sammy. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry if I butchered that, but I'm sorry. Nice Guys, Lights Out, and Cabin Sound, and that will be at JT's Pub and Grub, 1433 Lowell Road in Elyria, Ohio. $5 at the door gets you in to World Beats. These shows have been absolute. Sorry, buddy, I love you, but that scared the shit out of me. I did not expect Come Home to start playing again, but it did. So we'll just move into the next scene so that Come Home doesn't give me a fucking heart attack. Holy fuck. Okay. Anyway, but the World Beat shows have been going gangbusters. Everybody that's been going has been loving them and everything like that. I know I checked out one, and it was a great time. Great time. And these new venues that they're booking and everything like that are awesome. So kudos to them for getting these new venues and everything, and for World Beats being gangbusters. Lisa is doing everything she can to make sure that these World Beats shows are. But after that, on Sunday, June 23rd, the Women's Health Summit returns, and they are talking about sleep versus rest. So we got CJ Starr back in the building, comedian Precious back in the building. Of course, Jess is in the building because she hosts it. And we get a male's perspective on this Women's Health Summit with Paul, 1 to 3 p.m. exclusively on Kathie Productions, and that's brought to you by Growing Wings Adult Services and photography by Rosabelle. So that's what we got coming up from Kathie Productions and Kathie Productions. Fuck me, I'm going to be but that's what we got coming up. And then in 2 weeks, we return with a brand new topic, and we're going to talk about something that I'm dealing with in my everyday life. And it's not a bad thing that I'm dealing with it. It's actually a very, very good thing, because it's time for it gives me an opportunity to be able to try to help and educate a little bit for people that may not understand mobile security and things to look out for, things that maybe you may not see yourself, but are definite threats to you. devices. So that'll be in 2 weeks. But here we are. We're finally at the end of this marathon here that we've been doing for the past few weeks, where we're talking about the Jinx Part 2, the life and crimes, or the life and deaths of Robert Durst. We're talking Chapter 11 and Chapter 12. And these are the last 2 chapters of this marathon that has been going on when it comes to Bob and everything that Bob has been doing that's idiotic. So let's go ahead and get into it here. Chapter 11. Mostly the truth. What I found interesting... How did you get loose? Anyway. What I found interesting about this episode is, obviously, this is going to focus a lot on the testimony that Robert Durst gave in the trial. But we also find out a few things, sketchy things, about Bob's second wife, Debbie Sheridan. And we'll get into that as we continue to talk about the episode. But the episode starts out with Andrew Jarecki visiting Kathie Durst's family. Kathie's mother recounts the feelings of her disappearance. So this was back in 2000 and I think it said 2005, but I don't think so, because Andrew wasn't working on them. So it must have been like 2010, 2011, maybe. And he was working on All Good Things and obviously the Jinx Part 1. Kathie's brother watches the news as it breaks that Bob is going to testify. Lewin comments that Bob is testifying because it worked for him in Galveston. DeGuerin mirrors that thought, stating that the prosecutors didn't know what was coming to them when Bob testified in Galveston, and that Bob's testimony is part of what got Bob off in Galveston. That may be true. I have other theories on why Bob was able to get off in Galveston. But it might be true. It might be true that Bob's testimony definitely did help that. But the big question looming was, how was Bob going to spin the story that he was able to write the cadaver note but didn't kill Susan Berman? Because for years leading up to this point, Bob has always been the one that said whoever wrote the cadaver note killed Susan. So you just had your legal team, your defense team, put in a motion that you are willing to admitting to writing the cadaver note. So to that end, Bob, and to your own statements for 20 years at that point, whoever wrote the cadaver note killed Susan Berman. So with that, we should now know who killed Susan Berman, and his name is Robert Durst. And I'm going to put together my own theory on a lot of things here at the end of it, because obviously we still don't know why Bob. Anyway, we'll get to that at the end of the show, after we're done with both episodes here. Because I have another theory as well about some things that came out in episode 6. So they start on direct, with DeGuerin questioning Bob. And the first question DeGuerin asks is if Bob killed Susan, or if he knows who killed Susan. Bob answers no. DeGuerin then asks Bob if he can hear him without the use of a tablet that they had sitting next to Bob, kind of catty corner. So Bob's kind of sitting like this. The microphones are facing him like this. And they're just standard dynamic mics. They're nothing fancy like this. And he's got this tablet in front of him. And it's basically a fancy teleprompter. And what the teleprompter was putting out was everything that Dick was asking Bob. The funny thing is that there's a lot of times, kind of like I'm doing now, where Bob is just facing DeGuerin and he's able to answer the questions that DeGuerin is asking him. But then there's other times where you see Bob do that. And then he'll answer the question. So my thought on that was that either Bob knows how to read lips or his hearing's not as bad as they're making it out to be. So this, again, is one of those tactics that I was talking about that Bob would use to make himself seem more like a frail old man than he really was. DeGuerin asked Bob about his childhood. Who did Bob favor more, mom or dad? Who did Douglas favor more, mom or dad? Bob stated that he always loved his mother and tried to get along with his father. He revealed a time of the family playing Uno. It was always Mommy and Bobby versus Daddy and Douglas. Charles Bagley commented that Bob was the oldest of 4. His hatred for Douglas started when they were very little. It was also clear that Bob cherished his mother. DeGuerin then questioned him about his mother's death. Chesnoff comments that this series of events that happened since Bob's childhood, with his mom dying when he was 7, and, his father not really wanting anything to do with him because he kept running away. Then he kind of became the problem child. And his siblings would even go on to say that Bob was just evil and that he hated them. He was constantly beating them up and they never questioned him. Anything, things like that. So Bob was just an asshole from when he was a little kid. But that series of events that happened in Bob's life is what shaped Bob into being who Bob is now. A murdering narcissistic psychopath. DeGuerin changes the subject to ask Bob about meeting Susan. Bob said that they hit it off almost instantly and that they bonded over the fact that Susan's family life was a lot like Bob's. Her mom died when she was 7, or her dad died when she was 7. Her mom committed suicide or was possibly murdered when she was 12. So they basically were raised by other members of their family other than mom or dad. Ethan Milnes from the prosecution team comments about how compelling Bob is on the stand. And some of the jurors talk about that point too. But that's something that even Lewin, DeGuerin, and even Andrew Jarecki to some extent have said about Bob in the past, that Bob is a very compelling human being. And that's part of the reason why Andrew did the Jinx, is because of just how compelling Bob is. Judge Wyndham commented that Bob and the defense did a great job of getting to the emotions of a case. Really good defense lawyers are great at mining emotions. And Bob was doing this thing when he was on the stand. Again, another tactic by Bob to try to make the jury and other people feel sorry for Bob. And for, there are times when you're sitting here, you're just like, oh man, I mean, just look at the guy. Just look at the guy. There's no way he killed 3 people. Then you got to think, these crimes happened 40, 20, and 19 years ago at the point of this trial. But Bob would do this thing where he would start talking like a really old man. And yes, Bob was old at this point, but when there's 2 sides to Bob when it comes to this trial. There's the side of Bob that the jury and everyone in that courtroom gets to see. And then there's the side of Bob that we hear and see in Bob's prison phone calls and prison visits when people would come to visit him. When he's on these phone calls, he's very jovial, so full of life. Oh, thank you so much for coming to see me. Or like when he's talking to Debbie about sending Susan Giordano money and things like that. You know, he's a completely different Bob. But when he's on the stand and he's giving testimony, when I was growing up, and we would play Uno as a family, it was always Mommy and Bobby versus Daddy and Douglas. That's how he would stand. But yet when you hear him talking to people on the phone or when they would come visit him in jail, completely different Bob. And that's what I'm saying when Bob has these tactics to make not just the jury, but everybody feel sorry for Bob. But Bob had other ways to win people over too. Bob calls Debbie and talks about the first day of testimony, says he thinks it went good, but he's not 100% sure. He asks Debbie to come and visit. Debbie backpedals and says she doesn't know. He then asks her to come to court and see the trial. Just one day. One day. That's all he's asking for here. Debbie says she's just not up for it. Judge Wyndham commented that it's strange that Debbie isn't there, that he even would have had a seat for her so that she could have been there to support her husband. But he also stated that this is uncommon, that normally if a spouse is going through the kind of intense trial that Bob is going through, that the spouses are right there every day, front and center, so that their loved one can see them and so that they can get that emotional support that they need from their family. But Debbie Sheridan, a woman who's been married to Bob since 2000, and we're talking about 2020, early 2021 here, did not spend one day in the courtroom with her husband. Bagley commented that she did not want her name mentioned at all if it could be avoided. Who is this woman? What secret is Debbie Sheridan hiding? What? This has been mind-fucking me since this started. Who the fuck is Debbie? Why is Debbie not the kind of woman that you would think that she was supposed to be? There, every day, for her husband. But that she monitored the trial through her attorney. Wait, what? Who was there every day? Jarecki asked Bagley what the name of the lawyer is, and Bagley's just like, I'm not saying it. He mouthed it so that, like, I'm not going to be the one to say his name. You got me fucked up, Andrew Jarecki, if you think I'm going to be the one to say that man's name. Jarecki does remind him that he's in the show, but Bagley says he knows that, but he will not be the one to say it. In a call, Debbie mentions that her lawyer, Alan Aberson, was sent to go so that she knows what is happening and she gets alerts from him throughout the day before the trial is even done. We go back to testimony now. But before we do, I find it interesting. And back me up on this, okay? I find it interesting that this woman married Bob in 2000, has been his wife ever since. She's the one that Bob called when he got arrested in Galveston, and she sent him the money for his bail. She was then questioned by Galveston police on what she could possibly know about Bob murdering Morris Black. And obviously she says, I don't know anything. Yes, we're married, but I don't know that much, blah, blah. So, I mean, this marriage has been like a huge, what the fuck? Since they got married. And remember, Morris Black died and was murdered by Bob not too long after they got married. But yeah, Debbie's been with this guy since 87. She's known this guy since 87. Like, things are not adding up here when it comes to Debbie Sheridan. We'll get to that in hour number 2. But Bob is asked by DeGuerin if he had planned to meet Susan for Christmas in the year 2000. Bob replied yes, that they were going to do an LA staycation. They were going to go to visit Catalina Island. They were going to go to Disneyland. And Bob even offered to buy Susan new furniture for her house on Canyon Drive. He drove to LA from San Francisco. I believe I said that. And on the exact route that I said he was going to take on I-5. With the intent of visiting Susan. When he arrived at Susan's, he rang the bell a few times, but nobody answered. He knocked. Nobody answered. Bob has a key to Susan's house. So Bob unlocks the front door, goes in, walks to the back bedrooms, and in the very first bedroom, he sees Susan lying there on her back, feet facing the front of the house. Let me say that again because I was kind of far away from the mic. Feet facing the front of the house. The entire time he's mentioning how he found Susan's body, there is zero emotion emitting from his body at all. He's just stone-faced the entire time. He reached down and to see if she was breathing, and she felt cold, which means she'd been dead for a while. He grabbed her by her arms and tried moving her. He then noticed that her hair was covered in some kind of liquid. DeGuerin asked Bob what kind of liquid he thought it was. Bob decided that it was blood. He asked what he thought happened. Bob thought she fell, fainted, and hit her head. And that's where he got the idea to write the cadaver note. And then he lied about it for years because it's a difficult thing to believe. Even he has trouble with it himself. The defense rests at that point, and they then pass Bob off to John Lewin for cross-examination. Lewin stated that he'd been working on Bob's cross for a very long time. Just him and his dogs laying on his bed. And that he had 300 pages of documentation of times that Robert Durst lied during his testimony. Can Bob stand up against Lewin? From what I've seen so far in the trial of John Lewin is a no bullshit kind of guy. And he even told Bob that after Bob was arrested in New Orleans. He says, I'm a no bullshit kind of guy. I think that you're a no bullshit kind of guy. So Lewin sits down in front of Bob and he goes, I heard Mr. DeGuerin calling you Bob. Can I call you Bob or should I call you Mr. Durst? How can I address you? What would make you feel the most comfortable? Bob. being the no bullshit kind of guy that Bob is, looks Lewin straight ass in the face and goes, "You can call me sir." 1 point, Bob Durst. And actually, he doesn't even say, "You can call me sir." He's just like, "How about sir?" Got it. Sir. And he questions Bob about some things that Bob said about the family dynamics within the Durst family. And the memories that Bob was talking about playing Frisbee and playing Uno, and how those just could not be true. Here's why those are not true. Bob's mom died in the year 1950. The Frisbee was not invented until the year 1957. The card game Uno was not invented until the year 1971. It's a pretty big gap. So no happy memories there. And the jurors are starting to take notice at what Lewin is doing. And they even say, if Bob is willing to lie about something as stupid about as Frisbee and Uno, what else could Bob be lying about? Lewin follows that up, saying, in the world that you're in, you can pretty much say anything to anybody and do anything that you want, and nobody is going to question you. And you don't like it when people start questioning your veracity, do you, Bob? Bob's reply, those are all little words. If there's one of them you're having a problem with, I'm sure you can look them up on some app or another. Bob 2, Lewin 1. Bob then starts smiling, slightly menacingly, like he's got this look on his face like, if I end up not going to prison, you're next. So Lewin asked Bob, what's funny, Bob? And Bob was just like, you're asking me the same question 15 times. And at one point, Lewin's question was so long, Bob sits there and says, I think I need to congratulate you. You have just broken your personal record. You filled up 18 lines on my tablet. Yet again, point Bob. And that even got a little chuckle out of the people that were in the courtroom as well. But Lewin, just as quick-witted, and I want to congratulate you. You just set the perjury record. Bob 3, Lewin 2. DeGuerin even tries to object to Lewin's statement there, and Chesnov tried to file a motion, all of which fell on deaf ears to the judge. It was clear that Chesnov and DeGuerin did not know California law enough. And to properly object in the state of California, you need to cite the specific statute to which the objection lies in order for it to be a legal objection in the state of California. They didn't cite any in all of the objections that I heard throughout the trial that they aired on the Jinx. I did not hear a single statute cited by DeGuerin or Chesnov. And every time they tried to object, the judge overruled it, which he has the right to do because they're not objecting properly according to California law. And the judge even said, if you're not going to properly object, I'm going to overrule it every single time. And you can even tell the judge was getting pissed about this. Because there was one time you hear DeGuerin objection, whatever, argumentative. I don't even remember what it was. And the judge just instantly, the second the word argumentative came out of DeGuerin's mouth, overruled. Yes, sir, Judge Wyndham, sir. Lewin moves on. He asks him about Chavin. Chavin having been one of his best friends and having extremely damaging evidence against him. Now, I don't think that Chavin's testimony was all that damaging, but apparently Lewin does. And Bob replied that he never thought of Chavin as his best friend. Chavin, watching the trial at home, actually, and there's times when Andrew Jarecki is there with him, and obviously his wife Tracy, is watching this, and he hears what Bob says, and he goes, "Ugh, come on." Lewin asked Bob why he said that Chavin was one of his best friends then. Bob just says, "I don't know." Chavin still conflicted about his loyalty to Bob. And he even says that there's two Bobs. There's this Bob, and then there's the other Bob. The Bob that he knew, the Bob that was friends with him and Susan. And that's what makes this so challenging for him. And I completely understand that. Nobody ever wants to think that one of your best friends is going to be able to do something so despicable to another one of your best friends. In my own personal life, I had to face this. That's another story for another time. I didn't have one of my friends kill one of my friends. But I did have somebody that was one of my closest friends. And every time they would move out of state and they would come back, it would be like nothing happened. It would be like time never passed. And then they did something horrible to a member of my family. And I had to let that friend go. So I understand what Chavin is thinking. I understand what Chavin is saying about Bob in that instance. And that he was going to be conflicted either way the conviction went. Be it Bob gets convicted or Bob gets acquitted. Lewin asked Bob what he thinks about Chavin's statement, and Bob continued the play that Chavin was never a friend of his and states, his statement was so highly ridiculous that no one will believe it, and that he did it for attention. And that's all Chavin ever wanted was attention. And when he gets that attention, he just wants more attention. Lewin goes after the cadaver note. He questions how Bob could find the body without killing Susan. And an LAPD homicide detective, George Shamlin, explains how he created this great story that fits the evidence. Lewin agreed, stating that everything Bob said about the day was bullshit. But Lewin needed to prove that Bob was lying. But there was so much evidence that after Bob decided he was going to testify, a lot more of that evidence was going to fit right into shape. Detective Shamlin remembered that they had Susan's day planner. They had recovered it from her house after the murder. They introduced the day planner as evidence. And in that day planner for the week that Bob states he was with Susan, which was from the 22nd to the 28th, in Susan's day planner, there was not one single day in that week that Susan had any plans with Bob. And Susan was meticulous with this. Susan would write everything down in this day planner, and then when something would change, she would cross it out, take an index card or a Post-it note, and tape it above that page and write on the Post-it note or the index card. There was one mention of Bob during this time. And it was 3 days after Susan was killed. And it was just in the bottom right-hand corner of a page, very tinily written, "Call Bobby." Lewin questioned Bob about that. And all Bob said, I don't know if she had other friends she called Bobby, but she definitely called me Bobby. Lewin reminded Bob that he hadn't answered his question. DeGuerin objected that it was argumentative, and it was, of course, overruled. Lewin changes tactics on the fourth day of cross-examination. Reminded Bob that there is a special circumstance in this case of Bob killing witnesses. Susan knew that Bob killed Kathie and helped him cover it up. Bob's response was to slam the job that DeGuerin and Chesnov were doing. And he said, quote, what I'm charged with is killing Susan Berman. The fact that you're able to bring Kathie Durst into it just shows that the prosecution's lawyers have been doing better than the defense lawyers. I'm going to make that as a point to both Lewin and Bob here. Because it's another classic Bob answer. But it also helps Lewin, because that just goes to prove he's doing a better job in proving his case that Bob Durst not only killed Kathie Durst, but that he also killed Susan Berman. And that DeGuerin and Chesnov are just in way over their heads when it comes to this case. But 4 days of cross? Wow. And Lewin is just getting started. He asked if Bob missed Kathie. Bob said that he did. And this all goes back to Lewin's original plan for the case. Prove Bob killed Susan because Bob killed Kathie, and that Susan helped Bob cover it up. Bob talks about Kathie, her love of her family, and then Lewin moves on to the world-famous bathroom audio. The last 5 words of the last episode of season 1 of the Jinx. Killed them all, of course. Bob, when questioned about the audio, Bob saying that what he actually said was, they'll think I killed them all, of course. Lewin gets pissed off to no end on this. And he goes, oh, really? So you think you said they'll think I killed them all, of course. You know what? Play it again. Play it for Bob again. And you tell me in this audio, Mr. Durst, where you hear the words they'll think. So they play it again. Killed them all, of course. So then they ask, well, where's those words, Bob? They're not there. And Bob agrees that the words aren't there. But he can't agree that those 5 words, killed them all, of course, are damaging. He doesn't think it. He doesn't think that him admitting on a nationally televised broadcast on HBO, saying those words are damaging to him in any way. Lewin at this point is fuming. Tells Bob that it's time to tell people what really happened. To stop the games. To just tell people what he did. And Bob, in classic Bob fashion, proves why he is, in fact, rich and stupid. Bob's direct quote from his testimony: I never said I knew what happened to Susan. I never said I knew where Kathie was buried. What? Wait, hold up. What? Hold on. Time out. Did you just say buried? Let me read that again. I never said I knew what happened to Susan. I never said I knew where Kathie was buried. Lewin picked up on this, and he says, wait, what? Bob, why? What do you mean buried? Why did you say buried? And Bob's response to that was, it seemed like the logical next course. Meanwhile, watching all of this is Kathie's sister, Jim McCormick. And the look on Jim's face when he heard Bob say, I never said I knew where Kathie was buried, was just... DeGuerin admitted that he tried to get the cross-examination to stop, that Bob was getting worse every day. Lewin ended up questioning Bob for a total of 9 fucking days. And he then catches Bob in the only truth that Bob ever says. And that's in the last few questions of his cross-examination, because the judge at one point was just like, bro, you questioned him here. You questioned him here. You questioned him here. You questioned him here. Time limit, buddy. Let's move this on. Bob was asked if he had told the jury the truth to the best of his knowledge. Bob says yes. He then asked Bob, would you lie under oath to help protect yourself? Again, Bob says yes. I did not kill Susan Berman. Even if I did, I would lie about it. Lewin asks, how many times did you commit perjury during your testimony? Bob, again, rich and stupid, I would say 5. However, for Bob, there's different levels to perjury. There's perjury, there's minor perjury, and then there's minor perjury. More on that in a minute. Lewin asked if he would lie, if the lies that he would tell would hurt his credibility. Classic Bob, it doesn't hurt my credibility because what I'm saying is mostly the truth, except for the times that you committed perjury. Bob continues, there are certain things that I would lie about, certain very important things, and I'm not making it up as I go along. They then chop to just different parts of Bob's testimony here. I would lie to you. That doesn't count. Direct statement to Lewin. And the look on his face, again, would make it seem like if Bob ever got away with this, that Lewin would be his next victim. I think it would be very, very minor perjury. Lewin finishes the longest cross-examination in the history known to law, and that's coming from the judge himself, by asking if he killed Susan. No. If you did, would you lie about it? Yes. And in the fake, frail old man voice, yes. During a phone call with Debbie, she slams the job that DeGuerin and Chesnoff have done. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Durst spent a total of $12 million on his defense budget. I will say that again. Robert Durst spent $12 million on his defense team. Let that sink in for a minute. Poor preparation, shoddy, old school. That's the way that DeGuerin ran this. He made a glaring error when he almost did, but did, when he almost but did admit that Bob dismembered Kathie. So he's sitting there and he's saying, did Bob dismember Kathie Morris Black? I think DeGuerin knows a few things about Bob. He trips over his own whiteboards. Just total unpreparedness for this case. His closing statement is another shining example. Whether you think Bob is a bad person or a liar, your duty is to say not guilty. Here's the problem with what DeGuerin just said. They've proven that Bob is a liar. They've proven that Bob would lie about anything, even something as stupid as a Frisbee and Uno. Bob admitted on the stand that he has committed perjury. Bob admitted on the stand that he would never admit if he killed Susan. The reason we're there is to prove that Bob killed Susan. So by proving that Bob is a liar, you're proving that Bob killed Susan. So in that case, maybe this should have been Lewin's closing argument. But in that case, the only verdict that could be returned in that case is guilty. Deliberations begin, and they don't say how much time passed, and I forgot how much time passed. But at least 3 days of deliberation. And the verdict is in. And in another classic Bob Durst rich and stupid moment, Bob can't even be in the courtroom to hear the verdict read. Because while he was in jail, Bob was exposed to COVID. They discuss with DeGuerin and Chesnoff and Lewin and the prosecution and the jury and not the jury, but and the judge. All of these people are discussing whether or not they should deliver the verdict without Bob being able to be in the courtroom. They finally come to the decision that yes, they can read the verdict without Bob being present. Ladies and gentlemen, in the case of the state of California versus Robert Durst on the charge of murder in the first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant, Robert Durst, guilty. "20 years after Robert Durst murdered Susan Berman, Robert Durst was finally convicted of the murder of Susan Berman. Andrew asked both DeGuerin and Chesnoff how Bob found out he had been convicted. Because remember, Bob wasn't in the courtroom. Both DeGuerin and Chesnoff. Bagley stated that none of Bob's defense team were the ones to tell Bob that he'd been convicted of murder. They immediately got on a plane and got their asses back to Texas and wherever else they fucking came from after the verdict was read. Bob did not find out that he was convicted in the murder of Susan Berman until the next day when Alan Abramson, Debbie's criminal defense attorney, told Bob that he was convicted in the murder of Susan Berman. There are so many questions concerning this, especially after they reveal that this dude is a criminal defense attorney. Why? Why in God's fucking name does Debbie Sheridan need a criminal defense attorney? Why was he the one that told Bob that he was convicted of murder? What else did him and Bob have to talk about? Because clearly, this marriage from the start has been a sham to Debbie Sheridan. From the way it looks right now, Debbie Sheridan only wanted Bob Durst because Bob Durst had fucking money. And a lot of it. But now that we know that Alan Aberson is a fucking criminal defense attorney. Why does Debbie need this attorney? When he was asked this, and this is the only time he appeared in the entire episode, but when he was asked this during, it looks like some kind of, what the fuck is it called? Deposition. It looks like it was for some kind of deposition, because behind him is a screen blue enough to where you could use it as an old blue screen before we used green screens, and you could put whatever background behind him you want. But when he was asked this, why did Debbie hire a criminal defense attorney? I know why she retained me. The episode ended on those words. But a little bit more here about something. I did get to listen to a little bit of the podcast for this episode, so I did kind of lie about that at the beginning of the show. I apologize about that. But before Bob's testimony, DeGuerin was trying to get a motion for a mistrial due to Bob's failing health. It was, of course, denied. Lewin stated that this was just another way for Bob to dodge justice. He beat cancer in 2005, and he would probably outlive everyone here. A lot of Bob's testimony when he was on direct from DeGuerin was page for page, moment from moment, beat for beat, a repeat of his Galveston testimony. Until, of course, he started being questioned about the cadaver note. And also, DeGuerin questioned him about why he decided to do the Jinx. He stated it was because he was being mistreated everywhere that he went. Houston condos turned him down, New York co-ops turned him down, etc., etc. He thought that if he can get the real story told, that it would change people's minds about him. He contacted Jarecki after seeing Jarecki do some television interviews. Now, I'm going to say this, we're going to go to break, and when we come back, we'll jump into episode 6. This is a complete contradiction of everything that not just Bob had ever said about the way that him and Andrew Jarecki got together to do the Jinx, but also every way that Andrew Jarecki has ever said that him and Bob met about doing the Jinx. And this is not just from the Jinx, but this is also from the official podcast about the Jinx, but also from an interview that Andrew did for the bonus features on All Good Things. And I also think that Bob mentioned it on the commentary for All Good Things. I'm going to go back and I'm going to rewatch the film with the commentary. And if that's true, I'll put it into the bonus episode where we break down everything that was left out of the Jinx on an audio exclusive episode. Okay? But the story that Andrew and Bob have always told, and I do think that in the original version of my original Rich and Stupid episode, I even mentioned this. And that was right after I had watched the Jinx. I hadn't even seen All Good Things by that point. But I did watch the Jinx, and I did watch The Jury Speaks at that point. The story that both Andrew and Bob had said was that when All Good Things was being written, they sent a copy of the script to Bob to get Bob's approval and to see what Bob thought about the script and the fact that there's being a movie made about his life. After Bob finished the script, Bob calls Andrew and says, I really like this. I think you have a good taste on who I am. I think you know Robert Durst better than Robert Durst knows Robert Durst. And I would like for you to be the one to tell the official story of my life. And Andrew had also asked him, well, would you be willing to do the commentary track for All Good Things? And Bob agreed, so that Bob could sit there and say, okay, so this, yes, this happened, but it happened this way. No, that didn't happen. This happened. And we talk about a lot of the famous moments that Bob says during that commentary track that they even used in the trial against Bob for the murder of Susan Berman. So that is the official narrative that was given as to why Bob decided to do the Jinx. So it's a little bit different than Andrew had done interviews on television. No, it's because of the fact that Andrew directed the movie that is loosely based on your life story. A movie where in it you kill Kathie. Where Bob doesn't kill Susan, but Morris Black does. And then because Morris Black killed Susan, Bob kills Morris Black. So if the writers of that film and Andrew have a better sense of who Robert Durst is than Robert Durst does, could that not also be a reason as to why Bob is a liar and Bob killed 3 people? So what could episode 6 possibly have? We have our conviction, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Durst is convicted in the murder of Susan Berman. So what does episode 6 have? We'll get into all of that when we come back from break. Here's a track from Big Ugly off their second album, Forgotten.
Sorrow, seeking my savior in a bottle. Do you have sympathy I can borrow? I'll give it back if I wake tomorrow. Another day out on these streets, searching for something to eat. Blisters are breaking my feet, looking for a place to sleep. Lord,
Oh wow, that sounds really great. Wow, that sounds like a really good deal.
Who are you talking to?
The Northeast Ohio Ghostbusters.
Hello, Northeast Ohio Ghostbusters. What are you wearing?
Khakis?
Well, that sounds hideous.
Well, they're Ghostbusters.
All right. We're back here to finish up this discussion on the Jinx Part 2. And let me just go on the record by saying, if you thought that what happened in Episode 5 was damaging to Robert Durst, wait until you find out what secrets were revealed in Episode 6. Not just about Bob, but about Bob and Debbie's marriage, and a lot of other things as well. But before we get into that, I promised you guys that I'd have the next upcoming events from Four Loko, Scene Magazine Best Cover Band in Cleveland 2024. Tonight, if you're in Painesville, Ohio, they are at Riders Inn. It is an outdoor patio show. It starts at 7 p.m. Next Friday, Sound Stage Tavern in Wickliffe, Ohio. And then Time Warp, their debut at Time Warp in Westlake on June 15th. And then June 22nd, Shooters on the Water in the Flats. That's another outdoor patio show on June 22nd. So if you haven't checked out Four Loko, there's your next few chances to do so. All right, let's dive right back in. Episode 6. Now, I did not take any notes on Episode 6. Chapter 12 altogether, it takes a village. However, a lot of key things happened in that, and I'm going to kind of just put my own take on what happened in this. Not a lot happened in this episode, but a lot happened in this episode. If that makes any sense. If it doesn't, oh well, it will as we go through it here. But again, huge shout out to Big Ugly, my man Tony Gonzalez, for letting me use Come Home. Four walls and an empty bed, and then also, of course, to the Northeast Ohio Ghostbusters and the 216 Sports Network being now part of Kathie Productions. So we're not going to let Come Home finish. We're going to dive right back into it because we're running out of time here. But okay, so Chapter 12, It Takes a Village. Bob is now convicted. So at that point, that would be the end. Right? In any other story, that would be the end. Bob goes to jail for the rest of his life. See ya. Thanks for coming. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Bob. A few things happen after the conviction. Obviously, we have to go through the sentencing. So what is Bob going to be sentenced to? Bob is already in his 70s at this point in 2021 when he's sentenced. So, I mean, what could the judge possibly sentence him? Well, the judge actually mentions three things. The fact that during Nick Chavin's testimony that he admitted to Bob that he killed Susan Berman. The fact that on national television, Bob uttered the words, "killed them all, of course." And the fact that Bob's own testimony was that whoever wrote the cadaver note was the one who killed Susan Berman. The judge took all three of those things into account and says that Bob, on multiple occasions, on top of just those three, admitted to murdering 3 people. And that because of that, that the only verdict or the only sentence that he could oppose on Bob is life in prison without the possibility of parole. So that's it. That's it for Bob. Bob goes to prison for the rest of his life. Andrew Jarecki is interviewing Lisa DiPaolo, the reporter, and they're discussing Debbie Sheridan. What secrets could Debbie have possibly had? that the only other person on this planet that knows why Susan was killed would be Debbie Sheridan. Andrew actually asks Dick DeGuerin about this, and DeGuerin's like, I'm not saying her name. I'm not talking about Debbie. I refuse to talk about Debbie Sheridan. And that was part of their deal when DeGuerin agreed to do the Jinx Part 2. Who is this woman? Who is she? And in the course of Andrew sitting down and interviewing Lisa DiPaolo, he gets a phone call from John Lewin. And John Lewin informs Andrew Jarecki that Robert Durst has passed away. Even Lisa DiPaolo is just like, I thought Bob was going to outlive us all. Do they know how he died? No, not yet. So what happens now? Well, DeGuerin and Chesnov and Bob were going to try to appeal Bob's conviction. You know, fairly standard practice for anybody convicted of a heinous crime when it comes to murder. And obviously Bob was going to try to appeal this because Bob's Bob. Bob stands for 24 years was that he didn't murder Susan Berman. But California has a fucked up law. That if a convicted felon dies before their case can go through one round of appeal, their conviction is abated. Basically means it's not official. So yet again, Robert Durst dodged justice. Jim McCormick, Kathie's brother, finds out about this, and he's pissed. And he has every right to be. Because finally, after 40 years, Robert Durst was going to prison for murder. But it also proved that the reason that Susan Berman was murdered was because she knew that Bob killed Kathie. So in a way, that's justice for the McCormicks because now they have proof that Bob did in fact kill Kathie. Then Bob goes and dies. And his conviction is abated. So what can the McCormicks do at this point? They want justice. They want finality. They deserve finality. So what's there left to do? John gets on the phone with the family attorneys. Well, Bob fucked us again. What can we possibly do now? We can't put Bob on trial. Bob's dead. So what can we do? So they decided to start a civil case against Bob for the wrongful death of Kathie McCormick to the tune of $100 million. And obviously they can't go after Bob directly. Bob's dead. But they can go after Robert's estate. And that's exactly what they try to do. So what does this mean? This means that since Debbie is still technically Robert's wife, that she's the executor of the estate. This means they can finally question Debbie. But not only can they question Debbie, they can question the other people that have been involved in this and that have been stonewalling the McCormicks getting justice for 40 fucking years. And that's the Dursts. And that's where we're going to start. The first person that we see being questioned is, of course, Debbie Sheridan. She is Bob's wife, after all. And they ask her about, why she decided to marry Bob. So she basically just says, because he asked. But there's a lot of things that people don't know about Debbie at this point. When she meets Bob, and while Bob is on trial for the murder of Susan Berman, her life is in shambles. She's being sued because she's not paying her employees. And even before that, her original real estate company, where she was a powerful woman at a time when there were no powerful women. For a while, everything was gangbusters. She had successful women working in a successfully ran business by a woman in the 80s in a male-dominated field, which is commercial real estate. Then all of a sudden, one day, she decides she no longer wants to pay her employees their commission checks, and she starts pocketing the money. One by one, they sue the shit out of her for their commission money. That puts her out of business. She meets Bob at a charity event in 1987. She walks up to Bob, who's also standing there with Nick Chavin. Chavin is actually the one that tries to get Debbie's attention, but Debbie has blinders to Bob. Tells me that she knows who Bob is and what Bob is worth at that point. And mind you, this is 1987. Kathie's gone. They get into a relationship, but their relationship is strange. And it's even strange back then, right? Debbie pretends to be this thing for Bob. But then at the same time, Bob is doing anything that Debbie wants. She wants a Fifth Avenue apartment. Bob gets it for her. She wants a house in the Hamptons. Bob gets it for her. So all of these things that she's doing while Bob is on trial, Bob gave that to her. But the other thing that happened during this whole thing is that Kathie then became the person in charge of Bob's trust from the Durst organization. And there's phone calls back and forth between Debbie and Bob about all kinds of money being thrown around during the trial. Money to Susan Giordano, money to this person, money to that person. And Bob's even asking Debbie, well, I told you to send $30,000 to Susan Giordano. Why didn't you send $30,000? Dick tells me you only want me to send 10. And she says, because it's going to look bad, Bob. If she ends up testifying in your case, it's going to look like you're trying to buy off witnesses. Yes. But then at the same time, Bob and Susan Giordano have this weird relationship, right? And Susan does actually end up testifying in the case for Bob. It was never really shown during the show, but she did. But you also find out that Debbie's kind of greedy. And I mean, that should be a given, right? So every time Bob just wants to sit there and say, throw money at this, throw money at that, that's less money that Debbie gets in case he ever dies or gets convicted of murder. At one point, Bob even says this to her. That all you want is you want your nest egg. You want your money for when I'm gone. Well, when I'm gone, you want to make sure that there's something left for you to inherit. Well, if that's all you want, then I don't want you around. And Debbie's just like, okay, fuck you, Bob. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm done. Bye. And then Bob, wait. No, that's not what I meant, but you're not going to let me talk and blah, blah, blah. And Bob's just like, okay, we'll leave it all exactly the way it was. All of my assets go to you when I die. Okay, Bob, bye, click, and leaves. Debbie's not a good person. And that became so apparent in a lot of the things that were being mentioned here. They asked if Bob ever told her that he killed Kathie, or if she ever knew what happened to Kathie. And the story that she tells is that while her and Bob were dating, Bob came up to her and says, "I have something I need to tell you." And he pulls out this manila envelope full of newspaper articles and things like that about Kathie's disappearance. And, she tells Bob she's sorry, but he never thought that he killed Kathie. She doesn't think that he killed Susan Berman either. But she says that she agrees with the jury. So, in a way, I guess she does say that Bob killed Susan. I don't know. Like I said, the woman's wacky, right? So then, the day after Debbie and Bob get married, Bob buys a plane ticket and goes off to fucking San Francisco. And that's the time frame of when he killed Susan. So there's this one phone call from jail where Bob tries to call Debbie, and this dude Steve answers the phone. And, the guy doesn't say anything, so you just hear Bob go, "Debbie? Oh, no, Bob, it's Steve. Oh, hi, Steve. How are you?" Who the fuck is Steve? Hey, you know who Steve is? Who the fuck is Steve? Oh, Kathie's, Jim's, McCormick's attorney says, "Who's Steve?" "Oh, Steve's my unofficial husband." Huh? Unofficial what? Turns out that, yes, Bob and Debbie are married, but Debbie is actually in a real relationship with this dude, Steve. And they've been together for a while. She lives with him, but officially on paper, she's married to Bob Durst. Debbie used Bob's trust money, because she's in charge of it, to start her second real estate business, a real estate business that is fairly successful. I can see why Debbie wouldn't want her name being brought up in anything involving Bob Durst, but the fact of the matter is, bitch, you're married to him. Your name is synonymously, officially linked to Robert Durst, and it has been since your relationship started with him in 1987. There's no way around it. So the next people that they decide to question in this lawsuit is the Durst family. Because for 40 years, the Durst family has been stonewalling the McCormicks on everything. But not only that, not a single member of the Durst family, Seymour, Douglas, Tom, or Mary, ever reached out to the McCormicks and were just like, "We are so sorry for your loss. Is there anything that we can potentially do? She was a member of our family, just like she's a member of your family. Let us know if you need anything." No, what are the McCormicks here? Fucking crickets. So this is the first time in 40 years that anyone from the Durst organization, or the Durst family for that matter, has ever answered to the McCormicks on the disappearance and obvious death of Kathie. And this family is fucking batshit crazy from Seymour down, right? So the first person that they question is Douglas. Why is it taking you 40 years to reach out to the McCormicks? I don't know, it just has. Do you have any information? Did you or anyone else in the family know what happened to Kathie? Did Bob ever mention anything to you? No. And Douglas had said that, obviously Bob came to us and told us, and the McCormicks have come, and that's the crazy thing, right? Because even in the Jinx, Bob tells the story about one night when he's at his dad's house and he's talking to his dad about the disappearance of Kathie. So obviously Seymour knew, and Douglas walks in. And Seymour and Douglas are having the discussion with Bob. And at some point, Douglas says, this isn't something that we need to be taking. This isn't family business. We don't need to be talking about this. That's Bob's problem. Let Bob deal with it. So at some point, Douglas knew that Kathie disappeared. And as Bob's younger brother, you would think that he would. And Bob's even younger brother, Tom, knew about it too, as did Bob's sister, Mary. None of them ever reached out to the McCormicks. But the craziest part about that whole dynamic with the way that they were talking to the Dursts is that it seemed like each member of the family had a different story for what happened immediately following Kathie's disappearance. At one point, Bob's brother Tom tells a story about how the day after Kathie disappeared, they were having a meeting at the Durst organization instead of worrying about what happened to Kathie. And he even questioned this. Why are we having a meeting when a member of our family is missing? And nobody could answer that question. And apparently that was a conversation between him and his sister Mary. The next thing they know, Bob walks in, not in a suit and tie the way that you would think he would be in a big multi-billion-dollar corporation like that, right? But he's wearing just street clothes and muddy boots. And this was Tom's direct statement during his deposition in this wrongful death suit against Bob's estate. And then they questioned Mary about it because Mary is the one that noticed it and told Tom, look at his boots, they're all muddy. And your wife's missing? During Mary's official deposition, she actually denies that this conversation ever happened. But Tom swears up and down that it was a conversation that did. Debbie is smart. When asked by her attorneys, but also by the McCormick's attorneys, how much money is actually left in Bob's official estate, she says at one point there was probably $100,000, and now there's only 10. Where'd all that money go? But then you hear from the McCormick's attorneys, and he says that at one point that they had valued the trust at $14 million and his official estate at $4 million. But that through all the assets that Bob has, real estate, everything, it totals over $100 million. And that actually came from a statement that Debbie Sheridan shared at one point. So what happened to all of Bob's money? Well, she kept saying Bob spent it all. $30,000 to Susan Giordano here, $12 million to DeGuerin and Chesnoff in the murder case, money here, money there, and she even talked about Bob having Susan Giordano hide that money for him. And Giordano's actually still in denial whether or not Bob killed Susan or not too, because Andrew asked her about it. And she's just like, I know in my heart what I'm saying, and I believe what the jury says is true, that Bob did kill Susan, but I have my own personal feelings. I know in my heart that he killed her. Bob liked manipulating people, and he picked people that were weak-willed to be able to manipulate. And Nick Chavin even talked a little bit about that too. About how Bob would always just win people over with money. At one point when Doug Oliver didn't want to cooperate with DeGuerin or Lewin, Bob sent him money to keep him loyal to Bob. So not only did Bob kill witnesses, Bob bought them off. But there's even a phone call between Debbie and Bob where he even states, we need to start hiding my money so that in case the McCormicks do come after me in a civil suit. So this is something that they'd already talked about before. If the McCormicks come after me in a civil suit, I don't want them to be able to get shit. I want my money to be gone to where they can't find it. And these are all recorded calls from the jail. You see it right there. You see the little bars moving across the screen. Every time Bob or Debbie would talk, you would see it. And it was actually Debbie, the one that was concerned. Bob, if they come after you, they're going to be able to get everything because you were, if you end up convicted in killing Susan, they have more of a reason to come after you then. Because, oh wait, you killed Susan? That means you killed Kathie. You motherfucker, we want our piece too. But nobody from the Durst family had any kind of reasonable answer as to why nobody from their family had ever reached out to the McCormicks in 40 years. That was the most shocking thing to me, where it's just like, yeah, and they even said, like, us go against Bob? Are you crazy? That guy was crazy. He used to beat the shit out of us at any chance we got. Do you know what he would do to us if we would try to go after him for Kathie? Are you crazy? Every single one of his brothers and sisters said this. Every single one of them. Every single person in that family was scared to death of Bob because of the kind of person that Bob has always been. Bob has always been violent. Bob has always been anything. And when they questioned the Dursts about the physical abuse against Kathie, did you know about the abuse? Did you know that their marriage was rocky? And they kept saying, every time Kathie came around us, she was happy. It wasn't until the last year of marriage that we could tell that there was a change between Bob and Kathie. Well, both of them were fucking around on each other. Then you also have to remember, too, Kathie was stealing confidential documents on the Durst family and sending them to powerful people, trying to expose the Durst organization for what it really was. Was there a time that Bob and Kathie were happy? Yes. And Bob's brother Tom actually talks about this during his deposition. He says, we thought that Kathie was going to do the one thing that we needed somebody to do for Bob, and that was calm him down. But that didn't happen. The exact opposite happened. It made Bob worse. Bob was controlling and manipulative. But there was one other person that they wanted to talk to. One other person. Not just Debbie. Not just the Dursts. There was one other person that they knew that they needed to talk to, because this person was the crazy chink in everything. And that person was Chris Lovell, the juror in Bob's Galveston trial that ended up working for Bob after the trial. The same juror whose wife was Bob's assistant and helped clean Bob's apartment every week. The same juror from Galveston who helped his wife clear out Bob's apartment after Bob went on the run after the Jinx aired. The same juror from Galveston that's on video doing this. They actually do depose him. They would ask him questions about this. Why did Bob hire you after the trial? He liked me. We became friends. Okay. Were you at Bob's apartment whenever your wife would clean it? No. So you didn't help your wife clean Bob's apartment when he decided to run to New Orleans? His attorney, objection, Fifth Amendment. You didn't hide documents from Bob's apartment when you were there with your wife? Objection, Fifth Amendment. You didn't clean Bob's apartment with your wife after Bob left it? Objection, Fifth Amendment. Problem is, they have him on video. They could have showed him the video and been like, okay, well then who the fuck is that? Who's that with your wife at Bob's apartment? Because it looks like you, bro. That looks like you. Is that you? But obviously his attorney knows something because objection, Fifth Amendment. Okay, he's not going to incriminate himself. And that was about it. That was about it. That was in that 6th episode. Just, we learn a lot more about Debbie and the fact that Debbie would only married Bob for the money. And she even admitted that in her deposition. I married him because he's rich. I married him because he had money. The money was very important to me. And if the money, and if Bob had blown through all of his money during the trial, I would have been pissed. Okay. And just, nobody in the Durst family seemed to like Bob. And that this Chris Lovell actually received a check from Bob for $200,000 while Bob was in jail. And he even admitted this. He's like, Bob sent me a check for $200,000 after he was arrested in New Orleans. What? After? Why? I don't know. What'd you do with the money? Put it in the bank. $200,000 of hush money, maybe? $200,000 for, hey, thanks for getting rid of evidence. That's what it sounds like to me. For a long time, it's been thought that Kathie's body was buried in a forest in New Jersey. I don't know if that forest has ever been investigated to where they looked for Kathie's body or not. I've never really heard too much about whether or not they ever investigated that area or not. But that kind of does lend credence to what Tom Durst said during his deposition about Bob coming into that meeting with muddy boots. Well, you bury somebody in a forest, you're going to have mud on your boots, especially during the time of year that Kathie was murdered. And the night that she died, it was raining. I'm going to give my final thoughts on this. Much like Andrew Jarecki, this has been a case that I followed for a very long time. And when I heard that Bob died and that his conviction was going to be abated, I was pissed. And for a lot of the same reasons that the McCormicks were pissed. Because for all that time, Bob got away with murder. Not 1, not 2, but 3. One of which he can never be convicted of again because he was acquitted on those charges. And that's the murder of Morris Black. But then I started thinking, why would Bob do this? I mean, for Kathie, it made sense. The affairs, the trying to turn on his family, doing everything she could to possibly divorce him. And I have a feeling that because the abuse was getting worse and worse as the years went on between Kathie and Bob, they got into a fight. Bob beat her up just a little bit too bad, and he accidentally killed her. Well, who do you turn to at that moment? Well, your best friend is the daughter of a mob boss. Well, she knows how to get rid of a body. And we know from the conversation between Andrew Goldman and Susan Berman that she was trying to do everything she could to try to help Bob cover that up to make it look like Bob did nothing. But I do think that Susan knew, A, that Bob killed Kathie, and B, where Kathie's body was hidden, and might have even helped Bob put it there. And the reason I say that is because during that phone call between her and Andrew Goldman, she asked about how quickly a body would rise if it was in water, or how quickly a body would be found if it was in a park. And she freaked out when he gave the answer, it would be days. Because the body would be bloated with gas. And the bags would rise. You would have thought that Bob would have remembered that. Unless Susan ever told him. But you would have thought Bob would have remembered, oh my God, body parts rise and fill with gas. Or maybe that's why he cut Morris up. Maybe he thought that wouldn't happen. Nobody ever believed that Bob was not responsible for the disappearance of Kathie Durst. Bob was always on that radar, but Bob was protected because Bob had the Durst organization. And the Durst organization, the Durst family, was not going to let one of their family members, ruin everything that they had built over all this time. So they were going to do everything that they could to protect them. And what was best to protect them was to protect Bob. So that's why they didn't talk to the McCormicks for 40 years. But then the year 2000, a prosecutor comes along and they want to expose Bob for everything that Bob had done. And at that point, it had just been Kathie. We're finally going to solve this case. And if Robert Durst is the one responsible, then Robert Durst will be held accountable. Bob freaks. And he even tells this to Debbie. If I have to go on the run in 2000, I want to make sure that my stuff is being taken care of. And because of that, I'm going to marry you. I need somebody to pay my bills and everything like that. That was said during a conversation between Bob and Debbie. Debbie admitted that in her deposition. She married Bob solely because Bob gave her control of his money. And that because they were married, Debbie can do whatever the fuck she wanted with it. And what did she do? She fucked somebody else, probably in a bed filled with Bob's money. You get all the great benefits of marriage, and I get to spend all of Bob's money. I get to fuck you, and somebody else is paying for it. That's exactly the take that Debbie Sheridan had. And I do think this. I also think that Bob married her, and when he married her is the biggest just, why then? But then when you think about it, it all makes sense. Bob told Debbie about Kathie. And I think Bob told Debbie that he killed Kathie. But not just that he killed Kathie, where Kathie's body is. Well, how do you shut a woman up? Money. How else do you shut a woman up? In this situation, I'm not talking in real life, but in this situation, a woman like Debbie Sheridan, how do you shut her up? Here's my checkbook. Spend it however you want. And then I'm going to marry you so that there's spousal privilege and that you can't open your mouth until we're not married anymore. Well, they're technically not married anymore because Bob's dead. But on top of that, she's been fucking somebody else probably the entire time her and Bob were married. And I guarantee you, if the judge in Bob's case knew that, he would have thrown that spousal privilege out just like he threw out attorney-client privilege. And you want to know who bought that car for the Altmans? The car that John Lewin brought up, and how he knew it was a Lexus? Because Bob gave Debbie the model number, and she said, I'm going to get this year's model because if I'm going to buy a car, I want it to be brand new, so I'm going to use $300,000 and get the Altmans that car. Bam! This bitch knew everything. And that is why she had a criminal attorney. That is why she didn't want her name brought up in Bob's trial at all. Because then she could be implicated in everything. And I guarantee you that Debbie is part of the reason Bob killed Susan. Not just that Susan called Bob and said, I'm going to go to the police, even though the police hadn't even said that we're going to talk to her yet. And that was even in one of the articles that they showed. Slain woman was going to be, police wanted to question slain woman. Wanted to. But they hadn't yet, which means they had not contacted her. Lewin was right about that. But what did Bob think? Oh my God, one of the two people that are supposed to be that loyal to me, one of the two people that are supposed to have my back when it comes to the Kathie situation is now thinking about turning their back on me. What is that going to do? That's going to cut Debbie off. Debbie's going to be pissed at me if Susan talks. I got to do something about this because not only now am I protecting me, I'm protecting my marriage, my sham of a marriage. Bang. And then when the revelation came out in the trial that Bob had the key to Susan's front door, Bob probably didn't even knock. Bob probably didn't ring the bell. He probably thought the easiest way to do this was to just open that door, sneak up behind Susan, and bang. But the biggest question mark has always been, why'd he kill Morris Black? I put my Batman hat on for this wrap up, okay? Let's think about the Morris Black situation. Let's think about everything that Bob said about Morris Black, right? Morris Black was not a good person. We know that because they pulled up his criminal record after they found his body, except his head. And there's a reason why they never found his head. And we'll get to that as I break this down. Because I just remembered, oh my God, they didn't ever found Morris's head. And I think I know why they never found Morris's head. I just put that little piece together. See, the Batman hat is still on, folks. So, and we got to make this quick. Bob killed Morris. Because we know everything about Morris. Bob shared everything with Morris. Morris was the only one that knew that Bob was Bob at that time. Everybody else thought he was the deaf woman, the deaf and mute woman, whose name slips me right now, but we got 6 minutes. Morris was being evicted. And Bob had originally told Morris, you can move in with me. We'll find a new place, and that'll be our new hangout. Bob, at some point, changed his mind. Told Morris, no, you're not going to move in with me. I don't know why you keep telling people that. Well, now Morris needs money because Morris needs a new place to live. If he can't get it from Bob, because obviously Bob is now stonewalling him, Morris, fine. There's a $100,000 reward for any information about what happened to your first wife. I'm going to call the cops and I'm going to tell them everything that you told me and that you are not the person that you say you are. You're Robert Durst. And then on top of that, this is after Susan was murdered. I'm going to tell them that you killed your best friend too, because I guarantee you Bob told Morris all of it because he thought he could trust Morris, just like he thought he could trust Debbie, just like he thought he could trust Susan. Just like he thought he could trust the Altmans. Just like he thought he could trust Nick Chavin. And the exact same way he got Susan. Morris is walking out the door. Bang. Why did they never find Morris Black's head? Because Morris Black was shot with the same fucking gun that killed Susan. And if they found the same bullet in Morris's head that they found in Susan's head, bang. You now got Bob on 2 out of 3. But I guarantee you, if they had had Morris's head in Galveston, Bob would have never gotten away with it. Because then L.A. would have been extradition. We're taking him right now. And then New York right behind him. He's ours. So there you have it. My theory. And I think it's the best theory that exists because it makes sense. It makes sense. Bob ran out of time with Susan. He wasn't even supposed to be in L.A. Because think about this, too. If he hadn't just banged Susan in the back of the head, if he had cut up Susan's body, too, and then they find Susan's body wherever, and then they find Morris a couple months later in the exact same compromising position, holy fuck, this guy killed both of them. But I agree with one thing that John Lewin said, and then we're going to wrap the show up. Bob Durst is a narcissistic psychopath who kills witnesses. So it kind of makes you wonder. Maybe Kathie knew something too about Bob. Kathie definitely knew things about the Durst organization because she was trying to reveal them in a way to force Bob to divorce her. Just saying. That's going to do it for this edition of Money's Crazy Mind. We are finally done with the Jinx. Stay tuned for news on when that audio exclusive of when we talk about everything that was left out of the Jinx that was in the podcasts. That's going to be coming very soon. And also, when it comes to audio exclusives, I know that archive is so behind, and I apologize. A lot of things have been going on behind the scenes here. My mom got diagnosed with cancer. My dad needed heart surgery. Just a ton of things have been going on here. I promise, in the next week and a half, I'm going to get every episode on the archive, including that audio exclusive breaking down the podcast version of the Jinx, Part 2. Don't miss Money's Crazy Soundtrack Sunday nights on Sunny105Radio.com. This week, songs from movies turning 40, 30, 35, 30, 25, or 20. And then next week, who do you trust? Until then, everybody, I'm out.
Money's Crazy Mind is proud to be the exclusive flagship broadcast of Nameless, Faceless Productions.
That's all, folks.